Hi, Elizabeth. A warm welcome for all of us.
I heartily welcome Elizabeth onto our symposium today. A quick introduction of Elizabeth. Um, Solved by Design, along with our organizers, IDF Kolkata, Design Kolkata, and LearnUp Labs, and our supporters, Webbies, designers, and Live Holistic. We are very happy to have the founder and director of World Usability Day. It's none other than Elizabeth Rosenzweig. A small short introduction about Elizabeth. She is the principal at Bubble Mountain Consulting. And as the founder and director of World Usability Day, Elizabeth is responsible for the strategy and coordination for the global event to increase awareness of the importance of user-centered design. The event has been running for the last 15 years in about 44 countries. And Elizabeth is a design researcher, a UX expert, and the author of Successful User Experience Strategies and Roadmaps. I hereby welcome Elizabeth to present her keynote for our event. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. In fact, I've been wanting to do an event in India for years. So hopefully I'll be able to do this in person one day and come actually to see you. So. You know, World Usability Day was started in 2005. And it was started, so if you think about 15 years ago, I know it's weird, especially with the pandemic, because I feel like it's made time change. Like even the last 6 months feel like it's been several years instead of 6 months. Yeah. So you know, just saying, oh, World Usability Day started 15 years ago was strange, because the world is so different now. And one of the things, I assume you got my last deck, because I'll just start going and then hopefully I'll just jump into the slides as soon as you. But anyway, so 15 years ago, our field was much smaller. If for those of you who are in the field or old enough to remember anyway, so mostly we were talking about usability. User experience really was a term that came in by Don Norman in the late 1990s. And I have some pictures about that. But the idea is that, you know, when the field started in the mid 90s, oh, there we go. Yeah, okay, that's great. So I'll just say next slide. So next slide. we'll just get in. So everything I'm going to talk about, you're going to see a lot of it is in my book, and you can find this book on Amazon. And so if you have read my book or will read my book, you'll see some of my stories are from here. So if you miss anything or if you want more details, go ahead and jump into that. So as I was saying, the definition of usability and user experience has changed a bit from my point of view over the years. And so what happened is, back in the 90s, we used to say, okay, usability is just usability. It's just making things work better. And a few years back, one of our speakers did a little video and described usability as, you know, it's answering the question, can this device, can this object be used by human beings? Because if it can't, if it's not usable, then it's useless. And so here's some great examples, right, of things that will not work, right? Like maybe somebody thought it was a good idea not to waste so much, you know, this image on the left of the matches. Maybe they thought, you know, we want to save the trees. Let's save all that extra. We don't need that extra wood on the end, right? But if you don't test it with the user, you'll never know. You'll just burn yourself, or the water will pour back on you. Like it seems obvious to us, but at the time it definitely wasn't obvious. All right, next slide. So we started World Usability Day. This is where, this is a map I took yesterday, of a picture I took yesterday of all the events that are happening around the world. So what I love about the map is you can also imagine how the time zones is sort of working its way across the planet. And you can see here in India, you're one of the first that have signed up. So the day starts basically in the Eastern Hemisphere, moves its way around. And so you can see all the events that will happen throughout the day. So why did we start usability, World Usability Day? Well, to be honest, we wanted to start a usability revolution. We want to demand that things work better. We want to have people and designers be brave, stop blaming the user, and push back, and make sure that technology never ever makes anyone feel stupid. So what is amazing to me, and you may not know this, is that this map is not as there's not as many events this year for obvious reasons because of the pandemic. But if you look at this map and you realize there's a global pandemic at the moment, there's great economic hardship, and many places around the world, my country included, is experiencing great civil unrest. And yet, look at how many places around the world are celebrating and are focusing on the importance of usability. I'm so proud. So today I'm going to dive in a little bit more about empathy, about usability, and then show you some examples of different kinds of innovation that will push the user forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is empathy. Empathy is so important for our field. And if we understand empathy, then we can understand how to apply these principles of user experience. Because the idea is, and here's a great example of you know, the Dalai Lama, who projects and shows us by example what it's like to have empathy. So he's one sort of, you know, one example, but I like to use him to think, you know, the whole idea about empathy is to understand the other person. It's compassion and understanding. And that's what, to me, the basis of good user experience is, because it's not just a technical field. We need to understand others so that we can understand how they function and how they operate. So when the pandemic started, I don't know what it was like in India, but here in the United States, everyone kept walking around saying, oh, we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same boat. And at first I thought, you know, that's right. And that's a good way to think about empathy, but I think that's wrong. I think I have another way of thinking about it. I think we are all in different boats, but we're in the same storm. So what does that mean? That means your experience in India is clearly not the same as my experience in the United States. And even my experience in the Northeast United States is different than people in the southern part of my country, people in the middle of my country, not to mention Europe, not to mention South America, Africa, the Middle East. And so I think when we're thinking about empathy, we want to understand that we're not all the same. We're not all having the same experience, but we are all humans. We're all, like with the pandemic, we are all experiencing a pandemic, right? It's all over the world. How we're able to deal with it is different, and that's important for us as UX professionals to understand. Not everyone's the same as us. Not everyone's having the same experience as us, and so that'll help us become better designers, right? We can understand, if I just keep using the pandemic as the example, you know, I have friends who, you know, they're very comfortable, and they don't, the pandemic they're using as a time to write a book or find themselves or, you know, do more deep learning. And others are just trying to survive. Their boat is flopping around, and and it's taking up water. And so the key in empathy is to understand, you know, my experience is not going to be the same as yours, but I need to understand what your experience is. So if I'm in this storm and I'm on a yacht and you're in a rowboat, I need to understand the difference, or vice versa. I need to understand, because otherwise I'm not really understanding the people underneath. Okay, next slide. So we've got empathy, and now we're going to talk about innovation and design, because we want to put it all together. And then at the very end, I'll come back to how the human-centered AI can tie it all in a very nice little package. So first, let's think about design thinking. I'm sure plenty of you know about it, but just as a quick review. So design thinking is a way to creatively solve a problem, right? So it's looking at the problem, it's understanding that there's a lot of ways to think about it, it's breaking down barriers and old ways we thought about thinking about things, and thinking, what does a person really need, right? And then putting that into, as I call it, the equation of design, so that at the end we get something that is not just beautiful, not just enjoyable, but very, very useful. So the idea with innovation is you find an unmet need. You think about the scientific method. The scientific method is one where you have a hypothesis, you collect data, and then you change the hypotheses based on the data that you collect. So, for example, if we're using the boat analogy, we're all in a boat, there's a big storm, but your boat is smaller. So how can I help your boat float better? So my hypothesis is I need to understand what's going on in your boat. I need to understand where your problems are so that I can help fix it. And then a solution might come to me. I would come up with a prototype and then put the prototype in front of users. So that's your formative testing. You're understanding the problem. That's the beginning of the design thinking. And then you take the data that you collect from the testing and then you redesign and you make it stronger. So maybe we discover, well, the rowboat for these people need to be deeper. Maybe that's the problem. It's taking in too much water. Let's make the shape different so it doesn't flop around. And then that's the iterative cycle. You keep collecting data, you learn what to change or what not, and then you keep testing until you get it right. Now, we never have time to do so many cycles of testing, right? That's very unrealistic. So the idea is you got to understand the person, again, with the empathy, and understand what's important for them. So if you do that, you can innovate and create new experiences. So I like to think about innovation as three different types, with the most difficult one is called discontinuous innovation. Now, some people have said, wait, are you talking about disruptive innovation? So that's different. It's connected, but it's not, to me, coming from user-centered. User-centered thinks about the person first. So discontinuous innovation would be something that's never, ever existed before. Whether it disrupts a market or not, this isn't a marketing talk. This is a user-centered design talk. So if you look at this grid, the most extreme on both axes is the most newest idea, the something that's never been created before. Then as you go back to the axis, you see, well, there's certain types of innovation that builds on existing technology, and certain types of innovation that adds to existing technology. So as I said, discontinuous innovation, that's, I'll give you some examples and explain it a little more. Discontinuous innovation is something you've never seen before, but it's often built on or comes out of iterating things that already exist. So incremental would be building on technology that exists, just expanding it. And architectural is adding to that. So architectural innovation can be a combination of existing technology and new technology. Okay, so back to how you do the innovation. Discontinuous innovation is where you have the most potential, because you're creating something that hasn't existed. So how do you do that? Start by finding something you're very passionate about, because that's the only way you're going to do it. Because I'll tell you why, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and you have to be persevering a lot. But if you find something you're passionate about, then this is the direction you can do. So I think I mentioned I worked at, or maybe I haven't, I worked at a company you may have heard of called Eastman Kodak Company, which has lost its luster, as we say, and is not the company it used to be. But it started off as helping to invent technology, photography. So I actually have several patents, and this is how I got them, and they're for intelligent image management. So how do we do it? We started by doing what we call a literature search. We knew that it was, and this was back, I did this back in the year 2000. So back then there was no good way to organize images. So we had to think about, how would you organize images? So we went and did a literature search. We read all the patents that existed. We went about seeing what products were out there. And then once we saw that there was not something to solve our problem, that there was holes in the technology that already existed. So it left us room to invent something new. And what we invented was something that's actually now being used in Apple iPhoto, which is that you could figure out what time the picture was taken, or where the picture was taken by the metadata inside the picture. So you could automatically take it and sort it and not make the user have to tag it every time. So what am I talking about? iPhoto has, for those of you that have used it, you can now click on different filters on the side, and it'll say, show me all the pictures I took in North America. And that was something that didn't exist before, but we understood about, just watching what the user did and then collecting data and then showing it back to them. So again, it was this iterative cycle, and we ended up with 5 patents in that area, which when Kodak went bankrupt, sold to Apple, and Apple's now using. So that is how discontinuous innovation comes about. So here's a couple of examples of discontinuous innovation. So the first one would be the automobile, okay? So that never existed before, and it specifically never existed for consumers. So if you think about the automobile, it was an evolution of the horse and buggy and the train and the mechanical engine all sort of coming in together. So there's all these new technologies that were not available. And it wasn't just that they were new technologies, but how do you make them available? How do you make them usable for everyone else, right? So the idea was that it wasn't just that we could take the horse off and put wheels on and put an engine in, but we had to figure out how to make it work like, so that humans could use it. So the Model T was invented by Henry Ford, and it was sold to the consumer, and it literally changed the world, because now that anyone could get in a car and drive around, it changed the way people did business. It changed the way they lived their lives. So that was a discontinuous innovation. That was something that didn't exist before. I'll talk about photography. Photography is my favorite one. So Kodak did a similar thing where there was technology that was only being used for professionals, people who could only use this huge technology. But George Eastman understood that there was a lot of different technologies out there that could be put together. And so he figured out a way to take the technology of photography that was just big, giant plates and slow development. And he invented the roll film, and he invented this little camera so that he was able to make Kodak Kodak cameras be a consumer tool. And as a result of that, people were able to see things they never saw before, and see relatives they never saw before, because the relatives had these little cameras. And so the world became smaller as a result. So these two products completely changed the world, and so they would be in the category of discontinuous innovation. Okay, architectural innovation is a little easier, not quite as groundbreaking, but also very lucrative. So the way you would do that is you take components that already exist and then you build on them. So it can also be game changing, but it won't be so so disruptive. So the idea of discontinuous is that it disrupts current thinking. It's close to disruptive technology, but again, this is not marketing. So good examples of architectural innovation is, say, the internet. The internet started as a tool for the military to share information, and then as it grew and as new technologies came about, the evolution of the internet and email became such that anyone could use it, right? And then it also has changed the world. It's just a little slower. Same thing with mobile phones. I remember when I first got one early on, it was just a phone. It was a flip phone. That was it. Now, it's a little computer we're walking around with. But it didn't just happen all of a sudden. It was evolution, right? It started as a phone. I mean, truthfully, I think this is a terrible phone. It's very uncomfortable, right? I never use it as a phone anymore. But it evolved. It evolved from a phone. It's a mobile phone, but it's really a mini computer, right? So that's architectural. So a good example of architectural innovation is the moving camera, the moving pictures, or movies as we now call, or videos as we now call them. So to your left, you can see the guy looking at the film. That's George Eastman. So he's the inventor of film and photography. The guy on the right is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, the light bulb, electricity. Those two technologies existed. These two men worked together and invented moving pictures. Collaboration at its best. Incremental is, as I mentioned, a little slower, and incremental can also be thought of as like, you know, so the next version of the phone could be incremental, right? Like this is an old one. There's already 2 or 3. Incremental in some cases means they've added 2 more lenses to my phone, right? That's incremental. So here's a good example. Those of you may or may not remember something called the Sony Walkman. That's on the left. So on the right, we see the iPod, the iPod, right? So again, if we think about this innovative solutions and user experience, it's sort of the same, right? Like the idea with the Walkman was, oh, how can we take, people had these, what they called boom boxes, these very large stereos that they walked around with. Literally, I remember when I don't know what it was like in India, but we had people with these literally boom boxes. They were like this big. They would just walk around holding them. And then Sony came up with the idea of making it smaller so it could fit, you know, you could clip it on. So it's still an old technology. It's still, you know, tape, but it was mobile. So some people argue, well, this is the beginning of mobile devices. That little Kodak camera and this, right? They all evolved together to be the phone. That's the incremental piece. But what happened is Apple Computer was looking for a new invention, and Steve Jobs, you know, having at that point come back to the company, was trying to invent something new. So they were looking at the at the Walkman and saying, well, you know, that is an old technology with the tape, that's analog. We want to make it digital. And so the iPod and the digital files for images and video evolved out of this technology, and then that was where the incremental innovation came about. So this is a good example of incremental innovation. Okay, so how does the human-centered AI come into play? How can we put that together? So the iPhoto example that I told you about is actually using AI, right? So it's looking at the pictures I took, and it's looking at the timestamp, and it's matching the timestamp behind the scenes with my calendar. Or it's looking at the GPS stamp, and it's matching that with a map. And as the user, I don't have to do any of this sorting. It's looking at me as the user, and it's pulling out data that it's collecting as it watches me, and then it's improving my experience. So that's what human-centered AI is, improving the experience of the user through the techniques of AI. And it connects directly to innovation, because if you have human-centered AI in a discontinuous innovation product, you're going to be incredibly successful. That's just how it is. So next slide. So one of my mentors and leaders in the field, Ben Schneiderman, you may have heard of him. He invented the hyperlink, among other things. He's now working on a book about human-centered AI. He's on my steering committee for World Usability Day. So he and I talked about this because I think if you recall, I was talking about World Usability Day being a revolution, a usability revolution. He's taking it up to the next level. He's saying, let's take this old way of having AI where the algorithms, the technology is in the center of the development, and people are sort of an extra thought on the outside. And he's saying, let's take that and flip it around so that the person is the center and the AI technology is to help the person. So he's calling that a revolution, and I'm supportive of that. So he's actually been writing quite a bit about this, and you can, even if you just Google this title, you'll see quite a lot of material on that. If you're on the World Usability Day mailing list, you will have seen the last newsletter I sent out has quite a lot about this. If you're not on the mailing list, you can go to the World Usability Day, worldusabilityday.org, and you can sign up and get this information. So this is a little wordy. It's coming from Ben, but it's saying that, you know, back in the 16th century, long ago, Copernicus, who was an astronomer, understood that the Earth was the center. I'm sorry, the Earth was not the center. The sun was the center of the solar system, and that discovery changed the world. That was a discontinuous innovation to discover that the world isn't revolving around Earth, that Earth is revolving around the sun. So what Ben Schneiderman is arguing is that by understanding in terms of the development of AI, putting the person in the middle and reframing it is a similar revolution. So he and I are encouraging everyone to flip the development around and put the person in the middle. So here's a really good example of what do I mean. So, and this is coming out of one of Ben's papers, but if you look at the left of the screen, it's called Posthoc Report. So this is an example of a mortgage loan. So I'm not sure how it works in India, but in the United States, we have these little tools. Let's say I want to get a mortgage, you know, to buy a new house. I need to understand how much money I'm going to put in, how much I have, and then how much I'll pay each month. So the Posthoc Report, the one on the left, is the traditional way we do it, where people put in their information and they hit a button called submit, and then they get a result. And the reason it's called post hoc is because I don't see the result of my input until I actually click a button called submit. But if you look on the right, that's a good example of human-centered AI, because what's happening is it's not, first of all, waiting for me to hit submit. It is taking my information in real time and it's showing it back to me as the user. So it's not just saving me a step, it's actually engaging me more, because now I can play with my sliders and I can think, well, maybe if I can come up with more money, I can take a smaller mortgage and with the same income and this month's assets, and then I can see what my score would need to be. And so I'm getting feedback in real time, and it's focused on my issue and it's focused on my discovering my problem. And so this is an example of what we mean by human-centered AI. And here's some examples of innovation that has used human-centered AI that I've worked on. This one to me is very interesting. I spent a year working on body-worn cameras for police. I'm not sure if they've come to India or not. I know they're certainly in Europe. And why is this interesting? Well, I've been using the thread of photography. So if we look, this little body-worn camera is actually a mobile device. It's actually not just a camera. It's a mobile device. Or it can be up in the glasses. And it's a little computer that's reading a video, and it's actually streaming it back onto the internet so that the police can collect the information. And AI is being used on the material to do face recognition, to do all sorts of things like that, to pull out important information so that you know, the police departments can see what's happening out there quickly. So this kind of technology started after you know, September 2001, when the United States felt like it needed to up its game to understand more about surveillance and see what's going on. I'm not saying this isn't without problems. There's certainly problems. And we've seen a lot of, you know, there is some bias in some of the algorithms. And of course, that has to be fixed, because otherwise it wouldn't be human-centered AI. But the idea is that this kind of technology is incremental because it's building on video cameras, it's building on mobile devices, but it's also architectural because it's taking new technologies and it's adding it in. So discontinuous innovation, again, remember, that's something that never existed before. So here's a good example. I worked on a NASA life system. So NASA wants to go to the Mars in 2030. They came to me to say, how do we develop a user interface for a life support system on a spacecraft, how can we make it so that it's interactive and that it's easy? And remember, these users, their personas are very smart rocket scientists, astronauts. They expect to be able to take in a lot of information and digest it. But if you think about what a life support system is, it's some very basic chemistry and physics. And yes, these scientists obviously have to know about that, but they're going to be monitoring this while they're doing lots of other things. They're going to be monitoring this while they're basically on their way to Mars in a little ship, and their cognitive load will be overloaded. And so how did we decide to show visually information that was important? So we just went with some basic color norms that we know. Red is bad, green is good. And I know that's not always international, by the way. I'm perfectly aware that colors aren't always the same everywhere. This is NASA for Americans. So if the Indian Space Agency would design it, it's very possible the colors would be different, and I got that. But this is an example of discontinuous, because obviously this spaceship to go to Mars that's supposed to last, it's a 10-year, supposed to be, it's not going to happen obviously, is brand new. It's never existed. And so we had to do interviews. We did interviews with astronauts. We had to understand what it was like to be in these little spaceships, and then putting all of that together, we were able to design something that had never existed before. So how do we put HCAI, which is human-centered artificial intelligence, together with innovation, right? So we want to think about big problems. I think that's a good place to start. To put these two together, take discontinuous innovation to help produce things that not only haven't existed before, but also works for people. And so any of the three innovations that I discussed would do that, right? Discontinuous is just the one that's never existed before. Incremental will take things that have already existed and improve. And that's probably what most of us are doing, is incremental innovation. There is some architectural innovation, and to me, those are the exciting pieces. Okay, so we have 5 minutes for questions. How's that? Figured it out. Okay. Is there any questions, comments, thoughts? You could see more about my website on designresearchforgood.org down there also.
Hi, Elizabeth. It was a nice session. Robert here. So I wanted to ask, why is it called architectural innovation? Like, why the word architecture is there in that?
Great question. So architecture as a field is a design field. And you may have seen other areas where we're borrowing terms from other fields, like information architecture, right? Information architecture is basically taking the concept of architecture and using it for the web navigation. So I'm using it in a similar way. Architecture is a field of design, and it's a field that understands building a foundation, and then the fact that other things are built on top of it. So using architectural innovation as a concept, I think helps those who are trying to build things to understand, because if you understand architectural information, then you understand, well, I need more, there's holes, right? I'm building a platform, I'm building a system, I'm building a device. What do I need to build it? So it uses that concept of building in a real way. So hope that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, that kind of answers the question. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a good question.
That's great. Yes, I think we have one more question from Shubham. He is asking, there is a concept of explainable AI, and how does design would help in explainable AI more accessible? Shubham, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Good
Yeah.
evening, right? Lovely session. Thank you for being here. So, question is that there is a concept like explainable AI, right? So, people now consider AI is more of something which they do not understand, like how they come to conclusion or whatever the decision that AI is taking. They are not able to understand it. So that's why people have come up with an explainable AI, right? How can we explain this particular AI come into the process, and what is the procedure behind it, like? So
Okay.
I think, like coming from a design field, I think even it's a duty of designers to make sure that whatever the thought process that goes in the technology field is also being able to like being accessible to the normal people. They should be able to understand the process, how these machines are taking decisions on their behalf.
That's great. Okay, so now I understand it. So that is one of the basic premises of a good user experience, that the user understands that they're getting immediate feedback, right? So I can think of things that do it like let's think about Amazon.com. You guys are probably familiar with that. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you got it, but for those of you who understand it, let's say you go shopping and you bought, okay, so let's say I bought a new monitor. So then it's going to say to me, because you bought a new monitor, we're going to suggest this cord. We're going to suggest other things. That to me is close. I'm not sure that that's what the question is, but what's happening is that's AI in the background, but it's showing you. It's not saying, I'm using AI in the background to see that you bought a monitor and now I want to show you other things. But it is sort of like that. It's watching your actions and then giving it back to you live. So I think that there is a way of merging those two. And I think it's actually one of the precepts of human-centered AI, because human-centered AI has to provide feedback. Otherwise, it's not human-centered. So I think they go hand in hand. And so I'll say as a closing thought, because I know my time is up, but what is I'm struggling with in our field is the fact that the terminology is so specific and everyone has an idea that it means this or it means that, right? And usability is all about, does it work, right? And it's not just testing at the end, my opinion. And so it's the same thing with the explainable AI. To me, it's the same as human-centered AI, but we have to think about the terms. And I know it's an issue with international as well, because sometimes when we translate terms, they don't even come up the same. So the idea is, how do we get the concept so that everyone understands? So you're already making me think about that. So I will be iterating on this for my next time to include some of these other concerns.
Thank you so much.
But thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Some takeaways from what you spoke today. To begin with, do not blame yourself, blame the technology. And then you spoke about empathy, usability, design thinking, different forms of innovation, and human-centered AI, and super interesting projects that you're working on, like the life support system for NASA mission. And I loved how beautifully you explained that we are all in different boats, but in the same storm about the pandemic. I really hope humanity can beat this storm and we can get back to normalcy soon. Thank you
Me
for,
too.
yeah, thank you for all the enlightening and about usability and what you have been offering to the design community. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
yeah, taking your time out at early morning 7:30 for you. Thank you for doing that for us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope a day will come where I can come and
Yeah,
in
sure.
person.
Most welcome.
So
Yeah, thank you.
someday
Thank you,
I'll come
Elizabeth.
see you in person. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.